We'll be in touch, Mr. Lay said, arranging his face into finality. The meeting dispersed like a herd startled by weather, chairs back with polite scrapes and people pretending to button coats. Outside, the rain had shifted to a cold, later light. On the pavement, Rowan turned to me. "Do you believe it?" "No," I said. "But belief doesn't matter in probate. Paper does. What are you going to do?" I looked at the brass letters beneath the pebbled glass. Grafton and Lay, solicitors. Beneath that, in smaller script, specialists in wills, probate, and trusts. "I'm going to follow the paper," I said. The first thing paper tells you is how to look. There's a habit in loss. We roam the house touching things as if the wood might give up a password. But systems don't live in wood or cloth. They live in filing codes and ledger notes and a woman's decision to change a date on a template because she suddenly doesn't know if it is March or April when she types it. I went home and opened my laptop and signed into Company's House as if I were logging into a game. I searched Grafton and Lay. I found the filings, the annual statements, the skinny notes that companies learn to write so they can later say, "We told you just weren't paying attention." Grafton and Lay was not, as it turned out, an old firm at all. It had been a partnership, then a limited liability partnership, and then, most interestingly, an alternative business structure licensed under the Solicitors Regulation Authority, which meant that non-lawyers were permitted to be owners. That was a small rainfall of silver in a bucket I hadn't expected anyone to hand me. I clicked through debts and charges. A bank called Trident Finance held a fixed and floating charge over the firm's assets, registered 2 years earlier. There was also a secondary line of credit through a factoring group called Caravel. Interest at 11.2%, covenants breached twice in the last year, a note of forbearance in the margin. Rowan leaned over the back of the chair and read upside down. "Tell me the part you like," he said. "That they're thirsty. Thirsty people drink when water appears." He pulled up a second chair. "How much water do you have?" The hard answer was not enough. I had savings, yes, but savings are not water. They're seed. Once you plant them, you live in the suspense. I also had a reputation, that fragile currency of competence accrued over the last 7 years in a world Grand would have called vaguely improper, and I had called the future. I work with distressed businesses as an analyst and strategist, and I have a nose for numbers that sound wrong even when they're neat. What I didn't have was permission. Permission would never come from people who did not think I should have it. But regulation had left a slender door ajar, and hunger had put a price tag on the hinge. I called Priya. Priya Nayar answers her phone the way a curtain drops, a crisp parting, and then presence. "L, I was going to ring you. I saw the notice in the parish. I'm sorry." "Thank you," I said. I swallowed. "Pri, I need to ask you a question that I might not have the right to ask. What's your appetite at Citrine for picking up a small charge on a provincial ABS?" Her pause was one of the reasons she is better at her job than anyone I know. Not theater, thinking. Sector. Legal services. Wills and probate. Asset light, people heavy. Coastal town, the bank is Trident. Covenants breached. How small? 1.5. Unsecureds? A smutter. If they fail, the clients go to the next firm down the street. And why do you care? Because my grandmother left me a pound. Because I believe that in the belly of this file there is a knife that someone else has inserted and I intend to pull it out by the handle. Because sometimes if you can't get through the front of the maze, you buy the maze. I care, I said, because contingency is expensive when you don't have control. I think I can do something with control. I can bid the debt, Priya said. But you know Citrine will want an exit in 12 months and control at closing. What if I assign you a thin strip of the loan and keep the rest? I want the leverage of a secured lender to enforce proper governance and demand compliance with a Lark versus Nuggis letter from within the house. I can restructure the operations, sell off any non-core work, and if the partners are cooperative, convert into a stewardship model. You're not a solicitor. I don't need to be. The SRA licensing allows for non-lawyer management and ownership in an ABS, provided we appoint a head of legal practice and a head of finance and administration. The current Culp and COFA will stay in situ for now. I'll be a majority owner in the holding entity. Operational oversight, PRI. I can smell the rock, and I think it's limited to leadership culture. The associates are fine. Priya made that noise she makes when she's adding three numbers that don't want to sit next to one another in a
Rowan, who had stationed himself at the table with a notebook as if he were my junior analyst, choked silently on his water and gave me a thumbs up. Michael sighed in a way that made me picture a tie too tight against the last notch of his neck. And if I said hypothetically that Caravel is already sniffing around the factoring and might block, then hypothetically I would say that having the primary lender and the factor in a three-way dance has never ended in anything other than ugly toes unless someone leads properly. Let me lead. He laughed. It wasn't unkind. Make an offer, he said, and don't be an idiot. I made an offer that would not insult him, but would also make Priya later call me a bandit. He did not reject it outright. He asked for 2 days. I told him I would give him 1 because grief had taught me to be a little cruel with time. I hung up and stared at the phone as if it could tell me whether I had just set fire to my future or lit the front porch so I could find my keys. You were brilliant, Rowan said. I was something, I said. I rubbed my knuckles. We need to draft the caveat tonight so we can file first thing in the morning. We did. We composed it like a letter to a stubborn god, polite, precise, immovable. The grounds: reasonable suspicion of lack of knowledge and approval, potential undue influence, and suspicious circumstances surrounding the execution. We did not rant about the £1. We did not say what was obvious to me, that this was meant to shame me into silence. You do not scold paper, you direct it. I slept badly. In the narrow slip of hours between 2 and 4, I dreamed of my grandmother's copper kettles lined on the shelf and of a single coin rolling along the counter and dropping into the crack behind the cooker, where nothing ever comes back out. At 9 the next morning, Rowan and I stood at the probate registry counter with numbers in our hands and caffeine in our blood and a drafting pen in my bag that had been Gran's. The clerk, a woman with nails the color of new plums, took our forms without comment and stamped them in a rhythm that felt like heartbeat: thud, thud, thud. A caveat in place is an invisible line around a house. It tells the world to walk around, not through. It is also a message to an executor: not so fast. We walked back out into the salt, fresh air and took a breath that felt like a squared account. My phone chimed. Priya, call me. In the doorway of the registry, I pressed the phone to my ear and listened to 3 very quick sentences that made my stomach tighten and my jaw loosen in the same second. Trident will sell, subject to Caravel not blocking. They want cash in 5 business days. I can take 85% of the loan onto Citrine's book. You take 15% personally. We draft a deed of assignment and security assignment. Our counsel will want a proper ABS check, but because GML is already licensed, we don't need to wait for SRA approval to complete the loan assignment. We only need it if we trigger ownership changes. Are you ready? Yes, I said, hoping she could not hear the part of the yes that trembled. Good. Do not speak to the partners until we close. We don't want any elegant sabotage. Understood. Also, Elle, she said, her voice going from professional to friend, I know why you're doing this, but once we own the charge, our first duty is to our capital. Don't blow up the firm to make a point. My first duty is to the truth, and then to your capital. She sighed in a way that meant she accepted the order and would still nag me about it later. Rowan and I ate bacon sandwiches on a bench by the seawall and watched the gulls haggle over a chip someone had dropped. She would find this funny, Rowan said, you buying a law firm to argue with paper. She would, I said. She would also tell me to put on a hat. He bumped his shoulder against mine. I'm proud of you. The days stretched like a clean sheet on a line. We had to wire a deposit, send attorneys details, and prepare a bland email to ourselves about operational review so that if anyone intercepted it, they would die of boredom before they got to the part where it mattered. That night, I watched the transfer confirmation arrive with a drumline of adrenaline in my chest, and then I slept like a person who has burned her fear for fuel and found the ash neat in the grate in the morning. At 9:01 on the 5th business day, I pushed open the brass-handled door of Grafton and Lay with a kind of precise calm that I have learned as a cousin of panic. The receptionist looked up, her eye flicking to my suit and then to the time. Can I help you? You can, thank you. My name is Elodie Quill. I held up the letter on trident letterhead and the deed of assignment stamped and sealed like something a monarch would bless with wax. I'd like to speak to Mr. Lay and Mr. Grafton. It will be brief. The receptionist's lashes twitched once over eyes that knew more than they were permitted to admit. Of course, she said. Would you like tea? I would. Lady Grey if you have it, otherwise English breakfast will do nicely. I sat in the same room with the wallpapered fake books and watched my reflection blink in the glass of a framed photograph of a nondescript river. In it, two men were standing with their hands in their pockets, wearing the expression of partners who have learned to imitate solidarity because they cannot afford the real thing. The door opened. Mr. Lay entered. He had left his pocket square somewhere, and his tie was fractionally less smug. Behind him, a man I recognized only by process of elimination as Mr. Grafton. He had the faintly bewildered look of a person who thinks in billable units and suddenly finds himself reimbursed in cows. Mr. Quill, Mr. Lay said. This time there was none of the cheerful paternal. What is this? It is, I said, a deed of assignment of your credit facility and security interests from Trident Finance to Citrine Capital and Elodie Quill. I am here as the representative of the assignees. Grafton's mouth did a small fish open. You own the bank? I own 15% of your lender, I said. I smiled. Please sit. They did. I let the silence sit beside us until it grew bored and left. Then I spoke. We are not here to be villains. We are here to make sure you survive. That requires three things: a cash flow triage, a governance standstill, and a cultural correction. The first will involve moving your non-core work to free up your associates for profitable matters. The second will involve a formalization of your decision-making process under the supervision of a new business management committee. The third will involve you ceasing to act like you are allowed to be annoyed by the existence of regulation. Grafton flushed. Lay opened his hands in that small performative move once again. We have been running a legal practice for 30 years, Ms. Quill, and you have been running away from math for 10 years, which is why you agreed to 11.2%. Either you let us help you or we appoint administrators, and then you will not have to worry about whether I know how to run a legal practice, because there will not be a legal practice. We moved through the document, the standstill terms, the requirement that any file containing potential legal risks be elevated to the new committee, the appointment of a head of legal practice, their senior associate Julia Morell, who had run half the office quietly for 5 years while the men collected trophies, and a head of finance and administration, their bookkeeper, Marnie, who possessed a gaze that could strip paint. I kept my voice even. I did not mention my grandmother's name.
At the end, I drew a final sheet from my folder and placed it on the table. One more thing, I said. A matter of compliance and good order. As you know, a caveat has been lodged in the estate of Mo Quill. I watched their eyes briefly flick to each other. In accordance with Lark v. Nugas, please provide within 14 days a full statement of the circumstances surrounding the will's preparation and execution, including attendance notes, drafts, letters of instruction, and any audio recordings or contemporaneous documents. As you are the practice that prepared the will, you know this is not a request. It is a professional necessity. The vein at Mr. Lay's temple made a small, tight valentine. This is improper, he said. You are a party in the dispute. And you are a party to a forborne loan, I said, very calmly. We will appoint an independent external counsel to review the file and to report. Your duty is to your client, the estate, via the executor. My duty is to the truth. Between us, we can manage both. He stared. Then, carefully, he nodded. When I left the room, my legs shook so badly I had to stop in the corridor and read the framed river name to study them, the Avon. Outside, the receptionist handed me tea like a prize. Good luck, she said very softly, in a way that told me she knew exactly whose name was on the caveat and why it mattered. The next week unspooled in inches. I drove the associates into meetings and drew the shape of the firm on a whiteboard until it looked like a set of lungs, bronchi branching, small alveoli where the work actually exchanged oxygen. I discovered that Julia was a better leader than either partner, and that Marnie could balance the last 10 years of misfiled expenses with a pencil and a judgment that made me want to applaud. I asked every person in the building what they hated and what they loved. I wrote their answers where the partners could not miss them. At night, I drafted mine. Dear Mr. Lay, further to our discussions and pursuant to Lark v. Nugas, please provide a full account of your interaction with the late Mo Quill in relation to the will executed 13 March. I kept it clinical, not because I am clinical, but because an argument in a lab coat convinces a judge longer. I sent it to an external counsel, an old acquaintance, Sarah Edge, who agreed to act as the independent reviewer. She sent a list of what she would need: file index, drafts, emails, attendance notes, witness statements from the staff who watched the signature. She asked me whether there had been any family present during execution. I typed, "Not to my knowledge," and my stomach tugged as if I had lied. Because I had a memory I could not dislodge. Margot at the kitchen door that week in March. Lipstick too bright. Voice gentled to an unusual pitch. "It's only a little appointment to tidy paperwork," she had said, all soap bubbles and care. "We'll be back before countdown." By Wednesday afternoon, Marnie knocked on my office door with a look that said, "Come now." In the conference room, Julia had assembled the will file, a fat, red rope-tied bundle with the grim permanence of a slaughtered animal. The title page was neat, the index sparse in a way that suggested under-documentation if you were charitable and laziness if you were me. We began to go through it. The first draft of the will dated February, leaving the cottage to both grandchildren equally, the residue to be split between Margot and the grandchildren. A penciled note on the margin. Client says change to align with family discussions. The second draft, early March. Cottage to Margot, shares to Felix, ring to Rowan, £1 to Elodie. The residue division as read. No letter of instructions, no medical capacity assessment, no note of concern. My finger paused on the margin of the second draft because a spark had jumped into my peripheral vision. I leaned closer. A faint impression mark under the words, £1. It could have been nothing, the press of a careless hand, but I have lived my life on the premise that the difference between nothing and something is the angle at which you look. "Magnifying glass?" I asked. Marnie produced one from a drawer with the air of a magician who had been waiting years to be asked. I bent over the page and tilted the lens until the impression rose like a bruise in the skin of the paper. There, it was script, reversed. £1, unless she... The rest was smudged. My head got cold. "What is it?" Julia asked. "It's an impression in the paper," I said, from a previous note. "It says £1 unless she..." "What? Unless she what?" Marnie pulled the first draft to compare, then the second.
"Do you see the pen used here?" she asked. "Different thickness on this line. And look," she pointed at the witness signature block. The two signatures, both junior staff, were present. The date, March 13. Beneath, a pair of initials not in the usual place. M.L. Margot Little. "She was present," I said. The room went quiet. She was in the room when the will was signed. Julia's jaw tightened. "That is not good. It is not prohibited for a non-beneficiary to be present, but if the person present is in a position to exert influence—" "It stinks," I said. "At minimum, it stinks." Julia drew a breath through her nose. "Where are the attendance notes?" "Thin," I said, "and Mr. Lay will be writing a comprehensive statement." The door opened. The receptionist peered in, her eyes apologetic. "Miss Quill, there's someone here to see you. She says she's family." I straightened. "Send her in." Margot entered like a weather front that thinks it owns the season. She looked at the table, at the red file, at my face. "The bank told me that Trident sold the debt. Imagine my surprise when the lady at the branch remembered your name." I waited. It is one of my gifts, and hers is to fill waiting with words she cannot help but make weapons. "You bought your way in," she said, "to bully and rummage. I could almost admire the audacity if it weren't so—" She broke off, as her eyes fell on the magnifying glass and the place where my finger had been. For a moment, real fear lifted the fine hairs at the base of her throat. "You have no right," she said, but it sounded like a prayer for someone else to agree. I kept my voice gentle. "I have a duty," I said, "to the truth." Margot curled her hand around her wrist, a small, trembling movement she would deny later. "Mo was tired. She didn't want arguments. She told me she wanted to make sure you didn't misuse things. The cottage is too much temptation, Elodie. You fill it with your schemes." "Everything is a scheme to those who benefit from nothing changing," I said. "Where were you on the 13th of March at 3 in the afternoon?" "In the waiting room," she lifted her chin. "Outside." "Your initials are on the witness page," Julia said with the polite precision of a scalpel. "They do not belong there." Margot's mouth compressed to a single pale line. "I am the executor," she said, and smiled. "I have seen cats look kinder when they have cornered a mouse." "Please leave," I said, and when she did not move, I walked to the door and held it open. "You have 14 days to respond to the Lark v. Nugas letter. We will then file our claim." She stared, until the stare turned into something fragile and she could not bear to hold it any longer. When she left, my knees loosened in a way I had not anticipated, as if someone had quietly cut through a loop of twine that had kept me upright. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. "Tea," Marnie said, and it was not a suggestion. The next 2 days interrogated the file as if it were a witness altering its story. Thin notes, vague times, an email an hour after the signing confirming nothing much, all. On Friday morning, Sarah, external counsel, called to say she had received the preliminary package. "It is sloppy. Sloppy is not always sinister. Sometimes it is just men who think their handwriting will rescue them. But the presence of the daughter is unhelpful. I want the raw data, not just PDFs. Also, find out whether there is an audio dictation from that day. Some firms still use them for attendance notes. I'll ask Marnie." Marnie pointed at the old cupboard in the corner of the hall. "Dictation tapes," she said. "We keep them because Mr. Grafton thinks the cloud will one day explode." We opened the cupboard. It smelled of dust and a resignation I recognized from old school libraries. Boxes of tiny cassettes sat in stacks, each with a date and a set of initials scrawled on washing tape labels. We carried them to the conference room and lined them up like a choir of ants. March 13. JG? CG? ML? Finally, CL. March 13. Timestamp 3:47. "Please let there be a player," Julia said. Marnie produced from a drawer a dictation machine that might have been issued during a war. She plugged it in, clicked something, and the teeny tiny wheels whirred to life.
I sat very still. The room hummed, the hum of fluorescent light and law and intention, and then the tape sang its quiet whale song and leapt into voice. "Attendance with Mo Quill, will execution," Mr. Lay's voice said, tinny but clear. "Present, myself, 2 junior staff as witnesses, daughter, Margaret, outside in waiting room. Client seems—" There was a gesture in the pause, a hand moving in a way a tape cannot record. "Compos mentis, read through will. The question of—" A rustle. "The £1. Client says—" A crackle. A thump. The tape squealed as if someone had pressed down hard against the tiny spools. Then, "Unless she—" Another squeal. "Says she has no doubt." Marnie's eyes met mine. I said, "Play it again." She did. Again the rustle, again the squeal. I felt the thin hairs lift along my arms. Either the tape was damaged or someone had recorded over a piece. Tapes aren't like hard drives. You cannot surgically excise a sentence without leaving a scar. But you can press down at the right moment to blur a word until it turns into wind. "Is there another tape from that day?" Julia asked. We sorted, we measured, we read every scrawl as if it were a runic spell. Another tape, ML, 1610. Another, JM, the junior, 1623. The ML one was labeled oddly with a second set of initials in tiny letters, FL. "Felix," Rowan said from the door. He had arrived silent as bread rising, bearing 3 coffees and a bag of something sweet that I would eat in 2 bites much later. "He's been here?" "Or he asked for a copy," I said. I slotted the ML tape. The machine purred, stuttered, and then a voice came through I had not expected. Not Margot. Not Lay. My grandmother. "I don't understand the £1, she said, and in the small widening of her vowels, I heard her tiredness as if it were a coat. "It will hurt her." Mr. Lay's voice off to the side. "It is a legal device, Mo, to signify that you have considered and decided." "I have considered," Gran said, and there was steel under the cotton. "I have considered that when she is put into a corner, she builds a door. She sighed. It was small and real. Unless she finds the door, the £1 will sit like a nail in everyone's talk." A rustle. A chair. My aunt's voice from far back as if she were standing near the hinge of the door. "Mum, we've been through this. She'll only—" "Out!" Gran said. "Out, Margaret. I asked you to sit out." I pulled the tape from the machine with my fingers shaking. I said, "We need to secure these. Catalog everything." Marnie began to write labels with the speed of a clerk at a falling empire. Julia picked up her phone. "I'm calling Sarah, now." I walked to the window because if I didn't, I would begin to run and never stop. Outside, the pale sky had stretched itself thin over the sea, and the light had that silver flatness that turns everything into a watercolor you can't quite focus. My reflection looked back at me with the stillness I did not recognize. Rowan stood beside me. "Elle," he said, and the way he said my name told me he was both scared and impressed, and in love with me in the way only a brother can be, awkward and fierce. "I don't want her remembered for this," I said low. "I don't want her last word to be a coin." "It won't be," he said. "What are you going to do?" "2 things. File for directions with the court, and ask the firm for the raw dictation originals so we can have an expert examine the tape for overwriting." He nodded like a priest giving a benediction he truly believes in. When I turned back to the table, I saw something I hadn't seen before. A slim envelope, beige, with an old-fashioned gum seal gone brittle with time. It had slipped under the corner of the red file and caught there like a leaf behind a stone. In tiny writing on the front, the letters were careful and a little crooked. My grandmother's hand, so familiar I could have traced it blindfolded. To be opened by E.Q. if she asks. What is that? Julia said. A miracle, I said, and my voice sounded calmer than the thudding of my heart deserved. I slid my nail under the brittle seal and felt it flake like old snow. I lifted the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper and something that shifted under it with a small clink, metal against paper. I breathed in, held it, and drew the letter out. The paper, once creased and uncreased 100 times, now flattened carefully, as if someone had tried to iron the past. I unfolded it. I read the first line. The room tilted, then steadied. Elodie, if you are reading this, it means I did not find the door for you in time. The rest of the words blurred as the tiny object slid from the envelope and clinked onto the table. Not a coin, a key. Old brass, teeth sharp, a number stamped in the shoulder, 27. I raised my eyes. Every face in the room was turned toward me and every breath was held like paper over a candle. Somewhere in the corridor, a phone rang and was silenced. Outside the window, the gulls arced and shouted over something unseen. I took a breath and began to read aloud. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you.
It's empty, she said. The words struck the metal drawers and came back thinner, like a call over water. For a second, no one moved. The deed room breathed its cold air across our cheeks while the strip light shivered and steadied. I stepped forward until my shoulder touched the supervising solicitors. Inside drawer 27 lay nothing but the dull rectangle of dust where linen had once slept. Log it, I said, and my voice sounded like the edge of a coin. Photograph. No one touches anything. Marnie? All ready, Marnie said, lifting the logbook and reading the time as she wrote. The scratch of her pen was a metronome for fury. Margot's breath snagged behind me, a sharp intake like a caught thread. Felix took a half step closer to the drawer and then remembered everyone else was watching him and stepped back the same distance. The supervising solicitor, her nameplate read West, raised her phone and began to take photographs with the grave care of a field surgeon. I will record the state of the drawer, she said. Then we will expand the search to neighboring drawers and the safe. Miss Quill, you confirm you locked this room at 1900 hours? I do, I said. I also confirm that at 16:30 we had the TR1, the escrow letter, the ID1, and Mo Quill's letter of wishes present in this drawer. We scanned them under supervision, we logged them, we sealed the room. Do you have the scans? West asked without pausing. Yes, Julia's voice came from the doorway. She had her spine wound tight the way she does when she's holding back an oath. Good, West said. That will matter for the registry. For the court, this is spoliation territory. She glanced at Lay, who had drifted into the corridor without stepping over the threshold, like a man who has arrived at his own funeral earlier than expected. Mr. Lay, who else holds keys to this room? Lay looked smaller than he had that morning, as if his suit had grown. Myself, Mr. Grafton, Marnie, Ms. Morell as head of legal practice. The cleaner has a master key to the corridor, but not to the deed room. And external agents? West asked. No, Lay said. No one. Counsel for Caro and Pike began to protest. This was not a forum for accusations. The order was executed lawfully. His clients objected to the suggestion of spoliation, but West, on the judge's invitation, read her notes into the record like a metronome. Empty drawer, where documents were recorded present hours before. Red Cape residue in safe. Gum seal fragment in adjacent drawer. CCTV available. Keys held by limited persons. Mr. Lay? The judge asked. Lay cleared his throat. My lord, I have no explanation at present. I can provide a list of key holders and door access logs. Do so, the judge said, and at 10 tomorrow morning all parties will attend, remotely if needed, for further directions. Until then, no one is to enter the deed room except the supervising solicitor and such independent IT personnel as she authorizes. Ms. Edge, you may provide the land registry with your scans and a copy of these orders. The court is not presently prepared to stop that process. When the line clicked silent, we all stood staring at the speakerphone as if it might tell us how to live now. Then West looked at me and nodded, once, approval and pity in a small packet. Thank you, I said to her, and to Julia and Marnie, and finally to Lay, because sometimes gratitude is the only tool that doesn't rust. We'll stay until the CCTV is pulled. It took an hour. In that hour, I walked the corridor 3 times and counted the breath marks on the cold window with my finger and did not cry. At 11:30, the IT man, a janitor with admin access and the soul of a saint, arrived with a laptop and a box of cables. He knelt under the desk like a penitent and coaxed the camera to give up its memory. We gathered around the screen as the footage scrolled, an indifferent ribbon of people entering and leaving the corridor, a courier, the receptionist with a bin bag, Marnie at 1900 locking the deed room, the corridor empty. Then, wait, Marnie said. The timestamp read 1943. A figure moved into frame from the stairwell. Not Grafton, not Lay. A cleaner? No, the person wore a hoodie and a high-vis vest. Head down, hand in pocket. They walked to the deed room door and stood as if counting quietly. Then they reached into the high-vis pocket, drew out a small bundle, and... Keys, Julia said. That's a key ring. The hoodie glanced once up and down the corridor, turned the key, and slipped inside. 3 minutes passed. The hoodie emerged carrying nothing obvious. They locked the door again and left the way they had come. Freeze, West said. Zoom. The face was mostly shadow, but light catches details loyalty does not. On the left wrist, a leather bracelet, braided with a silver clasp. On the right hand, a signet ring with a dark stone. The gait, a slight outward roll on the right foot. Familiar in the way of a song you hate but have heard all summer. Felix, Rowan whispered. Felix barked a laugh that broke on his teeth. You can't. That could be anyone. Stand up, West said to him. Walk to the end of the corridor and back. He looked at his mother. She said nothing. He stood and walked, and on his 3rd step, his right foot rolled outward exactly as the hoodies had. Hands, West said. He showed them. On his left wrist, a leather bracelet, braided. On his right hand, a signet ring with a dark stone. He smiled, because some men are born with smiles that think they can issue writs. That's not proof, he said. It's evidence, West said, voice flat. And right now, it's enough to justify an application for your phone and for a third-party production order for any locksmith you've spoken to this week. Sit down. Margot put her hand on Felix's arm. It shook. This is ridiculous, she said. He was with me. In the hotel bar, I said, with your back to the corridor. She lifted her chin. With me. I looked at her, and for the first time that day, allowed my face to show exactly what I felt. Do not do this to yourself, I said softly. Do not make yourself the last liar of the evening. She looked away first. West finished the inventory at midnight and sealed the deed room with tamper-proof tape that glowed dull under the strip lights. She collected written undertakings from Lay and from me.
She took a copy of the CCTV and left with the air of a woman who keeps the law stitched into her lining. Outside, the harbor air smelled of salt and electricity. Rowan hid his hands in his pockets and rocked on his heels like we were two children outside a headmistress's office, waiting for a verdict and looking for somewhere to put our eyes. "Come home," he said. "I have one more thing," I said. "The registry." "Tonight?" "Tonight I will write the covering note I want to exist in the morning, and then I will try to sleep." At 2 in the morning, my statement of truth sat ready in drafts. We enclose a certified copy of the TR1, escrow letter, and ID1. In order of the High Court dated today, we certify as officers of the court that the condition for delivery of the deed has occurred. The originals are presently the subject of a preservation order and will be produced for inspection as directed. I wrote it with sentences so clean they looked like they had been washed. I attached the scans and the order. I went to bed and dreamed that every drawer in the world had been emptied and all the keys melted down to make a bell. Morning arrived, gray and red-eyed. At 9, the registry replied, "Application accepted for processing. We may require attendance with originals on the return date. Priority period remains active." The thin line a life walks on had not broken in the night. At 10, we dialed into the judge. He listened to West and to Sarah and to Caro and Pike in that particular silence that makes lawyers speak better than they mean to. He ordered the production of Felix's phone and laptop to an independent expert, an undertaking from Margot not to interfere with firm property, and immediate forensic imaging of the firm's servers. He warned in the careful cadence of a man who has seen tears in transcripts and is tired of them, that destruction of documents would be contempt. He listed the return date for 2 days hence and encouraged resolution where possible. In the break that followed, Sarah called me directly. "She has given you a gift," she said. "Use it. Offer them peace with handcuffs, a deed of variation, a donation, your grandmother's wishes formalized. They are in a corner. Corners make bargains." "What if they refuse?" I asked. "Then we go to war, and win or lose, you will carry the taste of it for a year. If you can fix it without tasting like ash, fix it." After the call, I stood by the conference room window and looked at the pale strip of sea. My face in the glass looked like someone else's great-granddaughter, stubborn, sleep-deprived, holding a kettle rope in one hand and a deed in the other. Julia came to stand with me. "What do you want, Elle?" she asked. "Not the list, not the law."
"I want my grandmother's truth in the record," I said. "I want my house back on the register where it belongs. I want Rowan not to wonder every Christmas whether he has to be polite to a thief. I want a line under this that isn't a scar." "Then ask for it," she said. I did. I wrote to Caro and Pike. "Without admissions and without prejudice save as to costs, we propose the following. 1. You consent to the lodging of the TR1 and withdraw opposition. 2. You agree a deed of variation allocating a fair share of the residue to Rowan and to a charitable trust in Mo Quill's name. Conditions to be agreed. 3. You agree to independent review of the will preparation by counsel agreed between us. 4. You undertake to return any documents removed and to cooperate with the forensic imaging. In 5, in exchange, we will invite the court to make no finding on contempt, reserving liberty to apply if you misstep again." I sent it and felt at once both foolish and adult. The reply came 2 hours later after I had convinced my hands not to tremble by solving 3 problems at the firm that had nothing to do with my family: a misposted indemnity, a trainee's panic over a limitation date, a client who needed a translation more than a lawyer. Caro and Pike's partner called Sarah and then called me. His voice had lost the starch in its collar. "Your proposal has merit," he said, as if the sentence might be contagious. "My clients deny any impropriety. However, in the interests of our mutual clients, the estate and its beneficiaries, we are prepared to discuss a deed of variation and a charitable foundation. On the TR1, we will not oppose registration provided the court retains seisin of the matter until the return date." "That's fine," I said. "And the documents?" A pause. "My clients have nothing to return,
But if anything is discovered, we will ensure it is delivered to the supervising solicitor." "Thank you," I said, and heard in my tone the particular kind of courtesy you give a child who is about to do the right thing because you made it easier, not because he is noble. We sent a draft variation within the hour. It gave Rowan a slice of the residue that would let him buy his own bakery in the village instead of renting a back room. It set up the Mo Quill Kettle Fund, a small local trust to pay for emergency heating, food, and legal advice for anyone in the parish who needed it, administered by Julia and a vicar who had learned to sign forms without sermonizing. We stipulated that Felix's shares in Quill and Marchant could not be sold outside the family for 5 years, during which time he would have to work 1 day a week at the community center, where he might learn the price of sugar and eye contact. To my surprise, they did not scoff. They haggled, because haggling is what you do when you don't want to admit you're grateful. We settled by nightfall. The next morning, the registry sent a requisition. Please attend with originals or provide undertakings to lost originals. Please provide statutory declaration of loss or destruction. Please clarify basis of escrow and capacity of signatories. Sarah and Julia built the reply like a cathedral made of precise glass. We attached a statutory declaration recounting the drawer's emptiness, the court orders, the scans, Lay's countersignature on the escrow letter, Mo's ID-1, the audio tape transcript in which Mo used the phrase, "unless she finds the door," and West's report. At lunch, the case officer called Julia to ask 2 technical questions. She answered them in the tone of a woman defusing a bomb. At 4, the portal pinged, title updated, proprietor, Elodie Quill. I did not cry in the deed room. I did not cry in the corridor. I did not cry in the corridor's tiny window where I could only see a sliver of a gray sky that looked like a shirt you keep meaning to iron. I cried in the stairwell, 2 floors down, where the acoustics are forgiving and where the echo makes you sound like there's another person comforting you. Rowan found me with 2 paper cups of tea. He did not say congratulations because he is my brother. He handed me the cup and leaned against the wall with me and looked at the flaking paint like it was art worth paying for. "So," he said, "home?" "Home," I said. Home is a series of things you forget you remember. The scuff on the back of the pantry door where we dragged into Creative Apples one autumn and laughed until we couldn't breathe. The chip in the sink that looks like a tiny white star. The way the late sun falls across the table like a hand. I put my palm on the kettle lid as if I were checking a child's fever and waited for the click. When it came, it sounded like an oath kept. We unrolled Mo's letter of wishes again and read it aloud at the kitchen table because some words need chairs. We called the vicar about the kettle fund and made him promise not to make a speech longer than 3 minutes on the theme of water becoming something entirely different. We sat in a silence that was mine, for the first time. Not borrowed, not begged, not threatened, just mine. At 6, there was a knock on the door. Not the iron insistence of last night. A human knock. I opened it to find Lay, hand in hat like a penitent. Behind him, Grafton, shorter than he had seemed when he thought height a form of argument. "May we?" Lay asked. I stepped aside. They sat at the table like men at a wake. Lay laid a small square box before me. He said, "I am here to apologize. Not on behalf of the firm, on behalf of myself. I should never have let your aunt near the file room that day. I should have made better notes. I should not have accepted the mouthfuls of convenience that pass for good practice in a sleepy town." He pushed the box towards me. This was returned anonymously to the supervising solicitor this afternoon. It was left at reception in a jiffy bag. She asked me to bring it to you. I opened the box. Inside lay Mo's letter of wishes, refolded. The seal had been broken and clumsily retacked with clear tape. Beneath it, the TR1 originals, creased but intact, and the escrow letter duplicate with Lay's countersignature. At the bottom, a small brass key lay winking, as if it had been an accomplice all along. Rowan made a noise like a kettle finding its boil. I lifted the letter and breathed in the papery smell that never truly ages. "There's more," Lay said, voice rough. "We identified the man on the footage. It was Felix." He glanced down. Mrs. Little asked me to say he is sorry. I told her that was insufficient. Thank you, I said, and for the apology. Grafton cleared his throat. Miss Quill, he said, using my name like it was a charity I might deny him, we would like to discuss the future of the firm. I looked at him and saw not a villain, but a tired man who had learned the wrong lessons. We will discuss it in the morning, in daylight, with a whiteboard.
He nodded as if daylight were a novelty. When they were gone, Rowan leaned back and blew out a long breath. So, he said, we have the house, the letter, the ring, and a kettle fund. We need a cake. I need bread, I said, and you are going to bake it. He grinned, turned on the oven, and began to weigh flour with the reverence of a mathematician. I set the table, put the letter in a sleeve to protect it from the predictable chaos of baking, and opened the window to let the evening in. The evening brought Margot. She stood on the path, her hands empty. She looked older than she had yesterday, like a curtain pulled back too fast. I stepped onto the doorstep and shut the door behind me so the smell of bread would not have to understand this conversation. I don't want to come in, she said. All right, I said. She looked at my face as if it were a landscape she had once walked and now did not recognize. He is my son, she said. I have made an idiot of him. I have taught him to be the worst of me. I am sorry. I listened. You don't feed some apologies. You watch them go past and hope they find a field. I wanted the house, she said, because I wanted the past to sit still. When your mother died, I lost any room that did not fit into a box I could carry. The cottage felt like a box. Yours, mine, ours. I forgot that boxes are for carrying, not living in. She took a breath that whistled. You have every right to hate me. I don't, I said, and realized it was true in the way I know the oven is hot and the sea is cold. I am too tired to hate you, and I am too busy. She gave a small noise that might have been a laugh. Busy, she repeated. What a mercy. She looked past me at the cottage window where the edge of the kitchen table showed like a quiet theater. May I, later, see the letter? Not yet, but one day, when you want to hear it and not argue with it. She nodded as if I had said something wise I didn't know I had. I will try to be someone you don't have to win against. I cannot promise, but I will try. Try. And when you fail, try again. She left with a posture that suggested she was lifting something heavy and invisible. I went back inside to the smell of bread and to Rowan's terrible singing. We ate and talked about nothing important with the joy of people who have learned that small talk is a luxury you only appreciate when you have survived in a country where all the talk is large. A week later, the return date arrived with a rain that seemed to have been falling for years. In court, the judge accepted the deed of variation, recorded the parties' undertakings, and made orders as to costs that made Carol and Pike wince. He did not name Felix in open court. He didn't need to. The transcript's silences were eloquent. He praised West for her management and Marnie for her logbook. He reminded Leigh that memory is not a compliance system. And then he unexpectedly looked at me through the screen and said, Ms. Quill, the court is grateful for the way you have balanced principle and proportion. Thank you, my lord. And I meant it. After the hearing, I walked to the harbor and let the sea air do to my lungs what the court had done to my head. Priya called. So, she said, owner of part of a law firm, owner of a house, owner of the temper. Rented, I said. I only ever rent my temper. She laughed. We'll restructure the firm and exit in 12 months, she said, practical as weather. We can do an ownership trust if Julia is willing. You'll take your 15% as a note and a small equity tail. And well done. Well done to you, I said. You bought me the key to the door I couldn't find. Your grandmother bought it. You turned it. You. I read aloud, and the words seemed to hang in the air like a note that refuses to die until you let your breath out. I swallowed, steadied my hands against the paper that still smelled faintly of my grandmother's kitchen, flour, lemon oil, heat, and went on. Elodie, if you are reading this, it means I did not find the door for you in time. People who love you will tell you to be polite. I have told you to be polite. Now I am telling you to be impolite when the door is small and the people behind you are large. The key is for a box that belongs to me at Seabank Savings and Loan. The number is 27. It holds 3 things you will need if Margaret is in a mood to tidy the world to her liking. The will I meant to sign in February, a record of the pills that made my head soft in March, and a letter I wrote to Mr. Lay when he sent me the second draft that did not sound like me. If this letter is still here, it is because I forgot to take it with me when I went to the bank the last time. You know how I am. I put things in safe places and then hide the safe places from myself. If the tapes sound wrong, ask for the little tapes. Men forget the little tapes. If the paper looks thin, hold it to the light. If Margaret is in the room, ask Julia to find the witness book. If I have failed you with my courage, forgive me, but do not forgive me with your silence. When they press you into a corner, you build a door. I taught you to use a knife to sharpen a pencil. Use a knife to sharpen your mind. And if you can do it without cutting anyone, so much the better. The cottage is not a prize, it is a workshop. Keep it as such, for hedgehogs and apprentices and pastries and thought. Love, Mo. I folded the letter along the careful old crease, and then folded my breath into my chest and kept it there until the burning told me to let it out. Rowan's hand was already extended. I passed him the paper, and he held it as if it were a feather that might take flight if he blinked. The key, Julia said softly. On the table, the small brass glint seemed brighter than it had a moment earlier, as if it had been listening and now approved of its own importance. We need chain of custody, I said automatically. Photographs, a log. Julia, will you? I'm on it, she said, already drawing her phone, already narrating the time and date into a voice memo, already laying the letter down on white paper so the gray flecks didn't confuse the camera. Marnie produced a notebook with a satisfaction that looked like a cat who has finally been asked to prove that yes, she can catch mice. 1412, Marnie said. Conference room 1. Present. E. Quill, R. Quill, J. Morrell, M. Beresford. Item recorded, brass key stamped 27. Envelope addressed in deceased's hand to EE = Q. Letter read aloud, content summarized for log. Add, dictation tape secured. One marked CL13/03, one marked ML13/03 with FL annotation, one marked JM13/03, to be placed in locked cabinet and originals to be sealed in evidence bag. Marnie wrote with a neatness that made me feel as if the room was slowly becoming the opposite of a mess. The opposite of a mess is not tidiness, it is truth kept in the right order. When does Seabank close? Rowan asked. 4, I said, glancing at the clock. If we move now, we can make it. Julia nodded. I'll stay with the tapes, she said. Marnie, can you lock the file room and set the camera to continuous? Marnie's chin dipped. I'll double bag the tapes and put them in the fire safe. If anyone asks why, I'll say we're doing an archive audit. I've been wanting to say that for 3 years. We moved like a team that had been practicing for a tournament we did not know existed until the whistle blew. I slipped the key into my pocket and kissed the letter with my eyes before I let Rowan slide it into the clear sleeve. The hallway smelled faintly of cool dust and printer toner. At the reception desk, the young woman, her name was Pippa, I had learned everyone's names, lifted her eyes to mine with a question. We're stepping out, I said. If anyone asks, we're at Trident. It was only half a lie. Trident was part of this story, and the truth would not lose its way if we trimmed a hedgerow here and there for privacy. Outside, the wind had picked up, the kind that lifts hair at the nape of your neck and tells you to be particular about the next thing you do. We walked fast down High Street, past the bakery where the morning's golden roll trays now sat empty like stages after the actors have taken their bow, past the butcher, with his pink paper parcels stacked like small, strange gifts, and turned left where the sign still said, Seabank Savings and Loan, in letters that clung to the Victorian brick like careful ivy. The lobby was paneled in wood that had absorbed a century of whispers and coin. A young man at the counter looked at Rowan with the swift courtesy small towns teach boys who expect to see one another in a dozen different contexts. The woman at the second station wore a suit the color of late sky and a brooch shaped like an acorn. She had the air of a person who can turn chaos into a ledger with a glance. "Good afternoon," I said. "My name is Elodie Quill. I need to access my grandmother's safe deposit box. She was Maureen Quill. The number is 27. I placed my ID on the counter, then the key." The woman's eyes flicked to the brass and then to me. Something softened in them at my grandmother's name. "Ms. Quill," she said. "I'm Ms. Darby. I knew your grandmother from the market. She sold me a trivet once with blue flowers on it that refuses to crack no matter how badly I treat it." The bruised smile that crossed her face was private and kind. "I'll need to check the mandate on the box. Do you have the death certificate?" "I do," I said, pulling a folded copy from the folder I had started carrying like the rest of my life, a plan disguised as stationery. "And I'm her granddaughter. She left explicit instruction in a letter that I should access the box." Ms. Darby studied the certificate, the letter that Julia had double-sleeved and I had brought because I know that sometimes people who run banks like to see letters made of paper and not merely trust the words you put in the room. She nodded once and typed something into a terminal that glowed faintly against the varnished counter. "There's a note here," she said, "from when your grandmother opened the box. It says, 'Add Ms. Elodie Quill as authorized upon presentation of this letter.' That's not typical, but it's not prohibited. She made a fuss, I remember now, when the form didn't have a line for what she wanted. We wrote it in the margin and countersigned it. I'm glad we were fussy." She looked up. "I'll need you to sign a log and—" She hesitated. That hesitation had a temperature, and it fell against my skin in a way that told me it was not administrative, it was human. "And," I said gently. Miss Darby lowered her voice. "Mrs. Liddell came in the day after your grandmother passed. She said she was the executor and that she needed to ensure the box was secure. We did not allow her access because the mandate did not include her name and because powers cease upon death. She was displeased." I steadied my face, though my ribs had suddenly turned into something that wanted to become a drum. "Thank you," I said, "for being careful." She nodded, a quick relief passing over her features like shadow. "If you'll follow me." She led us down a corridor where the carpet had been replaced recently enough that it still smelled faintly of glue under the cleaner. At the end, a door with a keypad, then another, then a small room with a shelf, a table, and the bland intensity banks choose to make you feel the importance of what you are about to do. Ms. Darby took the key, inserted it into box 27's lock, and then used a second key of her own. The satisfying weight of the mechanism withdrew with a clunk, like a sentence that finally remembered its verb. She placed the metal drawer on the table and stepped back. "I'll give you privacy. If you need copies, press the call button." The room was small enough that when Rowan and I stood shoulder to shoulder, our elbows knocked. I lifted the lid. Inside was a packet wrapped in oilcloth, a flat envelope on top, and a small cloth bag that made the quiet of the room change its shape. I placed the envelope on the table and slid my thumb under its flap. The paper yielded with a sound like a cousin of relief. The letter to Mr. Lay was on top. I recognized Gran's determined hand, thick strokes, emphatic loops. "Mr. Lay," I read aloud, because reading aloud made it true in a way that reading in my head did not. "The draft you sent does not sound like me. The clause about £1 is ugly and will make people talk. I understand you say it is symbolic, but I do not need to perform the fact that I have thought of my granddaughter. I think of her when I boil the kettle. Also, the part about Felix's shares needs to be conditional on his not selling them to Marchant without asking Rowan and Elodie first. If Margaret stands in the room while you read this, tell her to sit outside. She talks when I need to listen. I want the February version back, with the cottage to the grandchildren. I will not sign a document that feels like a performance meant for an audience who likes sharp things." Rowan exhaled a word that was not a word. I put the letter aside, with a care that felt like reverence. Underneath, the oilcloth bundle held a small notebook bound in red board, a copy of a will dated in February with the clauses Gran had described, and a stapled packet of pharmacy printouts, dosage schedule, new prescription issued on March 6th, haloperidol noted for agitation, pre-nata, sleeping tablets increased. At the bottom of the packet, a single sheet from Dr. Halbert's surgery. Patient reports increased confusion and fatigue. Consider review of capacity if executing important documents. My breath parked between my collarbones and refused to climb higher. The cloth bag, when I opened it, held a thumb drive and the cameo brooch Gran wore to weddings. I lifted the brooch, ivory profile, sardonyx ground, and felt the curve of her throat carved there like a memory you can touch. The thumb drive was labeled in black ink, "For Ellie, ask Rowan for the password." I looked up. Rowan had the small smile of a boy who had been keeping a secret he was asked to keep, and now sees the moment he can give it back to the person who asked him to hide it from himself. He gave it to me after Christmas, said I was to remember 2 things that didn't belong together. I wrote them on a card and burned the card like she told me. The password is the name of her first cat and the year the lighthouse lamp got stuck and the Coast Guard slept at our house. All together. I laughed, sharp, sudden, not quite sane. Of course it is. We photographed everything. We placed the February will and the doctor's note into the folder we had brought for originals, and we slid copies of the letters into another, because if I have learned anything in rooms like this, it is that arguments stand better if their feet are not all in the same shoes. When we had finished, I closed the box, and Miss Darby reappeared in her quiet way, as if the room summoned her when it had swallowed all the suspense it could eat. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it in a way that made me want to cry, which is not a debt you can pay with a handshake. "Will you make a copy of this note from Dr. Halbert as well?"